Hey, Indianapolis Motor Speedway fans, Doug Boles here. Another section of Behind the Bricks, and this time with Dale Jarrett. And we're going to talk about how important Dale Jarrett is, not just because he won here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but because of a tradition that he didn't know he was starting that has become one of the most important traditions related to winning any race here, but a tradition that thousands of fans every year now do when they come and tour the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But first, two-time Brickyard 400 winner Dale Jarrett joining us. Dale, thanks for spending some time with us.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me. And, as I've said many times, I've been fortunate to race at a lot of places throughout my career. But I don't know that there's anything more special than that opportunity that we got as NASCAR drivers to come to the Brickyard and race at the world's most famous speedway, Indianapolis Motor Speedway, that first time and many times after.
Were you here during the 1992 test?
I was not. There were, in starting with Joe Gibbs, that was our first year, and it kind of, I guess that drivers and teams were invited that had been around probably a little bit longer. So that was one of the reasons that we weren't there. So unfortunately, that's one of the few things that I missed out on.
So when that test happened, especially for those drivers that weren't there, because you're right, it was an invitation only thing. I think Goodyear and NASCAR invited a handful of people just to see if it was going to work. When people came back, was it something that drivers were trying to find other drivers and say, what was it like, and try and understand it, ask questions about that?
Oh, absolutely. I think each and every one of us that weren't there went to the drivers that were to see, first and foremost, what were stock cars like? All we'd ever seen were open wheel cars at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And what did this feel like? And was this something that was going to work for us to be able to, first and foremost, put on a good race for the fans? Because we were pretty certain that opportunity coming along was going to fill the stands, which it eventually did. But I think the answers that I got from a number of drivers were a little bit mixed there. It was going to be a challenge, but that's always going to be the case. Pretty much anywhere that you take a stock car, not many places are actually built for that. But the challenge was going to be, I think, how could we put on this show for the fans? Not that we were trying to put on a show, but we were going to have a race, but it needed to be entertaining. And I think that was the biggest thing. The speed that the drivers talked about for stock cars was something that was incredible. It's an incredible feeling that first time. But it was also amazing to move forward of how the track changed, just the appearance of it whenever you put fans down in turn one in particular on the front straightaway. It was just like, oh my gosh, I'm at a different racetrack. So a lot of the things that we saw, even as I went to test there for the first time before that race in 94, it was a great time to go there and be there. It brought chills as you walked through and then drove out onto the racetrack. But on race day in 1994, things changed dramatically because that was something, a sight that I don't think any of us were expecting.
It's funny you say that's one of those things that for a rookie Indy 500 driver who spends the month on practice days where we don't even open up the grandstands outside, right? Everything's inside. And then they show up race morning and they walk out and the grandstands are filling. And then when they go down in turn one on that first pace lap, it's a completely new facility. It gets 2.5 miles, but it gets really intimate, really small because those people are right there on top of you. And as you know, in turn one, you can't see through the corner. And so all you do you see this big tunnel of people. It is a pretty impressive thing from a fan standpoint. And then when drivers get to see it, it is that as well. You touched on something though that I'd like to talk about a little bit. We've over the years, so we're 27 years since the first Brickyard. This will be our 28th year. We're going to pivot a little bit, get off of the oval and try something on the road course. But both NASCAR and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway have gotten a little bit of heat because the racing, people say, well, the racing's not great, or it's really, and it long straightaways, really hard to pass because of the flat corners. But if you look at, for the most part, the Brickyard really pays off for a team that's done their homework, for a driver and crew that have figured out how to deal with the challenge. And almost always the cream rises to the top here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And oftentimes it's someone that's been a champion. You were a champion, you've won everywhere. This track, while it may not create that side-by-side racing, it did benefit the teams that could figure out how to deal with the challenge. And that's what I thought, at some level, that's what racing's about.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that, sometimes what the fans perceive and want to see as good racing, and I certainly understand it, especially now that I'm on the side of the TV. You're always wanting to see, two wide and sometimes three wide racing. And, that's not always going to happen. And it doesn't happen at a lot of other tracks either. But from a driver's perspective, you learn to appreciate the skills that it takes to navigate a racetrack like the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, because it is so totally different than anything else that we raced on. And I think if the fans would look at that a little bit more, and the TV people, I'm not just putting this on the fans because, we do it in TV that, hey, we need more side-by-side racing. Well, that's hard to do with stock cars at that place. I think that in looking ahead, the next gen car might provide a little bit more of that. If we get back to the oval, that might be a possibility. But from a driver's perspective, I always found it such a challenging thrill to get to Indianapolis and to try to figure out how to be better than everyone else. And I so much enjoyed and appreciated that from the first laps that I made there. And so from a competitor standpoint, there's a lot of great racing that goes on throughout a race that sometimes as a fan, even if you're there in the stands, you might not be in the place to see a lot of the action that's going on the other end of the racetrack, or if you're sitting on the front, not seeing it as you exit turn 2 and then go down the back straightaway to turn 3. So that's always a challenge, and it's always going to be a challenge to make the fans happy, the TV people happy, and also have something that makes the competitors and the owners and sponsors happy in making all of that happen. So again, that challenge is one that I understand and I appreciate. I understand that there has to be change. I will have to say, Doug, that when I saw the schedule come out and this wasn't at the oval, there was a piece of me that says, and still says right now, even though I'm excited about the racing on the road course, I have to say that I appreciated the opportunity to race and then win on the oval. That I just hate that some drivers aren't getting that opportunity now, because that's what made the Indianapolis Motor Speedway famous. And but there's always time for change, and I look forward to this.
Well, you're not alone, right? And it was a difficult decision, honestly, for us and NASCAR to make a decision to try the road course. And we've been careful to say this isn't necessarily a permanent change. Where the Xfinity race was fantastic last year, and we felt like let's just give this opportunity, especially with the triple header with Xfinity and IndyCar and Cup on the same weekend, same racetrack. We did it last year without fans, but we converted to the oval after the Saturday activities. So you're not alone. I've heard from several drivers. I've heard from a lot of fans who the Indianapolis Motor Speedway really is about the oval. So that's a sentiment that I think a lot of folks have. But I also think, the racing is going to be really strong. And as a promoter, I'm like you. I'd love 10 cars side by side all day long, because that's awesome. But this place it's just its own challenge. And what I've always loved about the Cup cars here is it really took a team effort, and you had to do everything right. You couldn't make mistakes. The driver had to be spot on. The car had to be set up right. The adjustments you made, that's to me, it just really was a great way of saying, if you wanted Indianapolis, you deserved it, because the driver was the best driver that day, and the team put together the best car. And I've always sort of loved that. So you grow up in the sport. Your dad, an unbelievable race car driver. When did you know that you wanted to be a race car driver?
Oh gosh, that came really late, especially in today's world, if you look at it, because there are young men getting opportunities in great rides at 18 to 20 years old. I didn't drive a race car, not any form of one, until I was 20 years old. I grew up around the sport, obviously, but when my dad retired, and he was a young man when he retired at 34 years old, he moved on, and opportunities for me around the sport, even though I was at Hickory Motor Speedway all the time doing work and helping there because my dad was a part owner and promoter there. I did everything from mow the grass to hand out programs to sell Cokes and popcorn in the stands.
That's what we do here. That's a promoter's life for sure.
Yeah, and you know, I didn't know anything different, but as far as sports went, you know, I was more stick and ball, and then I got a golf club in my hand and things like that. So, you know, I concentrated on those, not knowing if racing was something that was going to come my way. And it wasn't until I was finishing high school and trying to decide what I was going to do with my life, and was I good enough, and probably golf was the one thing at the time that I looked at more seriously, and I just decided that I was going to go a little different direction. And so a couple of friends of mine were building a car, and lo and behold, I got that opportunity in 1977 to drive a car. And that first night that I raced at Hickory Motor Speedway, it was a thrill like no other. And I'd been fortunate to win golf tournaments, to win football, baseball, basketball games, and you know, be a leader on those teams that I was on. And but there was nothing like the thrill of that 9th place finish in a limited sportsman race at Hickory Motor Speedway. And so that's how things got started. My dad wasn't the promoter at Hickory anymore. He was there watching the race for that first time. And I said, look, Dad, I don't know how I'm going to make this happen, because we didn't really have the money to get things done. And my dad might have had the money, but he wasn't going to put forth to see if I could become a race car driver. But so I did a lot of things from that point forward. It was a tough road, as it is now. I'm not saying that it's easy to get in now, but getting good opportunities now is a lot more prevalent than what it was back in the 70s and the 80s. You had to start out in basically lower class equipment for the most part, and try to work your way up.
So a lot of neat things happen for families in sports, but maybe for fans who've watched the sport, one of the neatest things we were able to watch was your dad calling races, especially Daytona 500s and races that you won. When you listen to his calls, what's that mean to you as the son of an amazing race car driver to hear him call races where you end up winning?
You know, Doug, it wasn't until after my driving career, and this is hard to say, that I didn't take more of an interest in what my dad was doing. I mean, I appreciated and knew what he was doing, and that he was good at that. Just as he was in becoming a two-time Cup champion in 1961 and 65, and eventually a Hall of Fame member in just the second class. But I didn't research and look at it. And even though I would go back and watch a lot of it, I wasn't appreciative until I got in the booth myself and understood just what a difficult task that is. Yeah, as a former driver, you can get up there and just talk your way through, but there's a lot that goes into it. And then I had the opportunity to be a part of the coverage with ESPN and see the work and the effort, and thinking back to what it must have been like for my dad at those moments. And I'll go to the 93 Daytona 500 as the one that most people go back to. And as I was racing Dale Earnhardt at the end and driving for Joe Gibbs, and they turned it over to my dad on the last lap as I was making a move to try to pass Dale Earnhardt and win the Daytona 500, a race that at that point he'd done everything except win that race. And
right.
They turned it over to my dad, and we still get comments to this day. It's just incredible that when you think about something that happened almost 30 years ago, that people still describe it and remember it. Yes. Remember my dad's words and the emotion, and my mom sitting in the van and watching the race. Just so many incredible things in a moment that I will always have, and I'm much more appreciative of it now that I've been on the other side and looking at that, and you know, sitting and watching my son Jason race, you know, knowing how nervous I was there, watching my son Zach now, who's a minor league baseball player, watching him at every at bat of how nervous it was, just to realize that my dad was on national TV and I'm about to win the biggest race that NASCAR has, and him to be able to keep it all together. So I think that all of that being said, he was very professional in what he did, I believe. And a lot of people have told him that, including Dale Earnhardt Sr., who said, hey, because my dad went to him after that race and said, hey, I might have overstepped my boundaries there. And he said, hey, he said, I'm a dad too, and understanding that. So I'm so proud of my dad in so many ways. He's 88 years old now, be 89 in October, still doing pretty well. And what he was able to do and accomplish in this sport has just been incredible. But more than that, he did it all the right way. I don't know that I ever ran across anybody that really had something negative to say about my dad. And that makes me very, very proud. The closest that anybody ever came was, I was asking David Pearson in an interview I was doing with him one time. And I said, David, a lot of people called my dad, and he had the nickname of Gentleman Ned on the racetrack because of he was pretty fair and the way that he raced. And David looked at me and he said, I wasn't one of those people. He said, Ned Jarrett was a hard racer. I don't know that gentleman was what I would call him, but he was a very fair racer. So that is as close to a negative comment that I ever got from anyone.
It is one of those moments, I think as we get older too, right? You're in that profession, so you see it even more now. But even as we get older, right, we start to forget about our self-focus that often happens, and you start realizing the sacrifices that your parents make. And you touched on it, just the nerves it's a lot easier when you're doing it. When we have to watch your kids do it and you want them to be successful, it's really difficult. So family, tradition, all those things are really important. 1996, you win here at the Brickyard. What causes you to kiss bricks? And did you have any idea that 25 years later, this year, it is one of the biggest things that happens, not just for the Brickyard weekend, but for the Indy 500 and virtually everything that happens here at the Speedway? People have to kiss the bricks, and it's Dale Jarrett's. You're the one responsible for it.
Yeah, well, let me first say that had no idea that this would be something that 25 years later, that it would be something that every driver wants to do, wants that opportunity. And the fans being involved and having that opportunity I think that's almost means more to me than anything else, that they want to be a part of something that I did for the first time. And it all came about. And I have to give Todd Parrott some credit here too, who is my crew chief at Robert Yates Racing with the 88 car. And 1996 was our first year with that team as Robert started his second team. And, we had a pretty good year to that point. We went out in our first race and won the Daytona 500 in 96. We backed it up by winning the Coca-Cola 600. And then we had kind of gotten to where we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. We had a great test at Indianapolis. And so we were excited about this. And Todd and I literally were sitting, it was a late night. It was after midnight. At Michigan International Speedway, trying to decide what we were going to do to our race car for the next day. And so we got to talking about our test and some things that we had done at Indy. Would that help? And so along those lines, we said, look, we have a chance to go win it at Indy. And I'd finished third in 95 in the 28 car for Robert Yates. And so it was a track that I loved, and I knew that we had this chance to do this. And we said, we need to do something different. The 500, the Indy 500 has the drinking of the milk. What can we do? And we somehow brought up about the yard of bricks. And then we got to talking about going out and having a picture made out there on the yard of bricks, because that was, where things, the one thing that's kind of left there from the very first time. And so we wanted to do that. And so we talked about it for the next couple of weeks because Indy was coming up, and we didn't let anyone else know that the kissing of the bricks part kind of came as we got there. And we saw that, because I kind of had forgot about it as I'm celebrating in Victory Lane. This is a place that I'd seen the greatest race drivers in the world enjoy. And at that point in time, the only two stock car drivers that had won there were Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt Sr. And that's pretty high company right there. Yeah. Here I am enjoying a Victory Lane that only the greats had been able to do at that point in time. So Todd said, hey, remember what we talked about? And I'm like, oh yeah. So we literally, nobody had any clue. I had not told anyone in my family. My wife, Kelly, didn't know this was going to happen. We didn't tell Robert and Doug Yates anything about it. And so we surprised everyone. And, for some reason, they followed us out there, and it wasn't orchestrated like it is now. It's very well set up, but that's kind of how it came about. And when we got out there, we said, hey, let's kiss the bricks. And that's where it all started, and how it got started. And so it was pretty much a conversation of a driver and a crew chief, maybe feeling a little too much joy and maybe a little too confident in what we were able to accomplish with that team that year. But to think that here we are 25 years later, and every driver that wins there in whatever class, and I appreciate that, just the opportunity to race there. And if you're able to win there, you're deserving of going out there and kissing the bricks. And it's just an incredible feeling comes over me. And Todd and I usually text each other after each and every race when we see somebody kissing the bricks.
You talked about how it wasn't orchestrated. It is now, obviously, the photo shoot and all that, but the best traditions at the Speedway aren't orchestrated. So Louis Meyer asking for buttermilk in 1936, that wasn't something orchestrated. It became a tradition. You guys kissing the bricks, not orchestrated. And I've always said, we, the Speedway, doesn't define the traditions. The traditions sort of define themselves, the way that the drivers adopt them and the way our fans adopt them. Jim Neighbors was asked to sing Back Home Again in Indiana because they didn't have anybody. And then all of a sudden, Jim Neighbors becomes a tradition. So, I mean, that's the best traditions are those ones that aren't planned. We can't force them on folks. And it is it's a special moment. And every time it happens, I think about you and how thankful we are that you and Todd decided to go out there and ultimately end up kissing those bricks. One more question for you, and this is really more global about the sport. So for the last few years, we've been talking about how cool would it be to get NASCAR and IndyCar on the same weekend at the same racetrack. Last year, we got to do it, unfortunately, without fans. And it wasn't really this, it was at the same facility, but IndyCar was on the road course, Cup cars were on the oval. This year, it's all together, Xfinity, IndyCar, and Cup, all here at the Speedway on the same racetrack. What's that like, and how important do you think that is for the fans to bring the two top North American series together on the same weekend as an opportunity really to showcase not just NASCAR and not just IndyCar, but motorsports in general?
Doug, let me say this. I think it might be the most important weekend in motorsports history. And you folks with Mr. Penske and his people and all of you there have done a tremendous job in making this happen. It's something that's been talked about for a long time. And yes, last year it was done in a way, but without fans, which was so unfortunate. I had the good fortune of being there and hosting the pre-race show with Mike Tirico and look forward to getting back and seeing fans in the stands this year and being a part, because regardless of where we're racing there, if the racing was good or not so good in some opinion, the fact is the fans came out in droves for many years, and we want to get back to that because they're the most important part. It's really no fun if you don't have those big crowds there and people watching what you're doing. So this opportunity to put IndyCar and NASCAR together on the same weekend on the exact same track is just incredible. And that you're making history, and I'm excited for that part of it in the next weekend. And this should be something that becomes a tradition. However we're doing it, does it have to be at Indianapolis? Wherever it is, I think we can move this around. And you're starting something that I believe will catch on. It's going to be way more powerful than kissing the bricks. And we're going to look down the road in 10 years and say, this was all started in 2021. And is something that's going to continue, because I think it's very, very important to both series and to all of motorsports, giving the fans opportunity to see basically three different series. Even though the Xfinity and Cup cars may look somewhat alike, they're totally different in the way the people driving them will be totally different. So to see all of this take place is just going to be incredible. I'm so excited for them. You talk about the fans. I can remember that. Two things about 1996 and winning that the Brickyard 400 for the first time. There was the tradition of riding around, and this happened to be a Chevrolet Camaro pace car, and we were sitting. So it's Todd Parrott, myself, and our wives were riding around, and this is, gosh, probably at least 30 minutes after the checkered flag, but riding around on the back of that, and there were still hundreds of thousands of people still there. And to hear that cheer, I still get chills just talking about it to this day as to what that was like. Just incredible. And you were talking about my dad earlier. I remember he went into the press room with me, and he pointed out that someone, and I think it was someone from Ford Motor Company, maybe Dan Zacharias, that had come up with a stat that they were talking about the amount of money that I won that day. And that obviously was secondary to anything else. It was, that victory lane and that trophy that I was going to have from Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But the incredible purse was more money than my dad won in his entire career that I was able to win that one day. And my dad pointed this out, not in a negative way, but right, just how far the sport had come. So you put all of those things together. It's why things happen at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And I'm glad to have been a part of it through all of these years.
Well, I appreciate you taking time and chatting with us. I didn't realize your promoter beginnings. And I appreciate that you never left those roots. You promoted as a race car driver. You were great for the sport there. You continue to promote today as a commentator and a great spokesperson for us. So thanks for joining us. We can't wait to continue to stay in touch and look forward to seeing you here at the Speedway.
Look forward to it and seeing all the fans back to the track. Thanks a lot.
Well, race fans, there you have it. Dale Jarrett, not only is he a Hall of Famer alongside of his dad, he won 3 Daytona 500s, 2 Brickyard 400s. But most importantly, for those of us that are fans, he started a tradition that has become as endearing to all of us as that glass of milk that a driver gets in victory lane for the Indy 500, that kiss in the bricks. Look forward to seeing you all here this weekend as we get going for our Brickyard weekend triple header, IndyCar, Xfinity, and Cup. Can't wait to have you here. And if you get a chance, you're through town, take a bus tour, kiss the bricks like Dale Jarrett.